What's up, everybody? Salama from MadeGains, and what you're about to see or hear is a Q&A interview that I did with sleep researcher Dr. Amy Bender. So just to give everyone some background on who Dr. Amy is, Dr. Bender is a clinical program director of athlete services at the Center for Sleep and Human Performance. She's also an adjunct assistant professor of kinesiology at the University of Calgary. She received her PhD and Master of Science degrees in experimental psychology from Washington State University, specializing in electrical activity of the brain during sleep. Her current research focuses on the relationship of sleep and recovery on athletic performance. She has sleep screened over 250 Canadian national team athletes and developed sleep intervention protocols for numerous Canadian national teams. Her research interests stem from her being an athlete herself. She's a Hall of Fame basketball player, has summited a handful of volcanoes, completed an Ironman in 2009, and currently runs around chasing her 3 children who are all 5 and under. So this interview will be broken up into 2 parts. Part 1 will be about the 3 key factors for better sleep, which will cover sleep quantity, sleep quality, and sleep timing. And then in part 2, which will follow in the near future, will be about optimizing sleep for athletic performance and body composition. Just a heads up for those listening in, say this comes out in podcast form in the future. During the interview, Dr. Amy does use slides from her previous presentations. So this really does add to the visual learning experience for those watching. But for those listening, we are as descriptive as possible, so you should be able to follow along. So Dr. Amy certainly has a ton of knowledge and experience on the subject, and I'm sure we'll all get a lot out of it. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. What's up, everybody? It's Salama from MadeGains, and I'm very happy to have Dr. Amy Bender, who's a sleep researcher and is here to answer some of the sleep questions that we have. So Amy, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Very welcome. Definitely glad to have you on. So the first question is from Adrian Charles, and it's about the quantity of sleep. And he says, what is the optimal amount of sleep on average for a person who works 5 days a week and trains 5 days a week?
Great. Well, let's see. I have a slide that I can show you guys. So people want to know, how much sleep do I need? And it really depends on your age. So we have different ages or different stages across the lifespan on the bottom here. And then we have the recommended amount of sleep for each of those age groups in dark blue here. So if we're talking about a teenager, the recommended amount of sleep would be between 8 and 10 hours of sleep per night or across a 24-hour day. And then if we're talking about a normal human adult, that would be between 7 and 9 hours up until about age 64. And then when we get into more of that elderly, older ages, that drops between 7 and 8. So in general, if you're hitting that between 7 and 9 mark and you feel refreshed, upon maybe an hour upon awakening, you're likely getting the amount of sleep that you need.
Can I ask you one question about this slide?
Oh, yeah.
So, because I see numbers below the blue box and above. Is that arranged in the higher range? And is the blue like the optimal amount?
Yes, great question. So the blue would be the recommended, and then the light blue would be potentially appropriate. So for a teen, there's probably a small percentage that can do okay on 7 hours, and also a small percentage that may need around 11 hours. So it's a huge range when you look at the light blue areas which may be appropriate. So for a young adult, between 6 and 11 hours may potentially be appropriate. The dark blue would be what we would recommend.
So young adults between 18 and 25, you're looking, actually it's for both. So anywhere between 18 years old up to 64 years old, the range is 7 to 9 hours of sleep, right?
Yes, so you want to be hitting that minimum 7-hour mark.
Okay, cool.
If we're talking about athletes, most sleep scientists agree that we think athletes need more sleep because in order to recover from the physical and cognitive demands of the sport. Here we have some professional athletes along the bottom here from different sports, and then the amount of sleep that they report to get across a 24-hour day. So we see Roger Federer reports between 11 and 12 hours, LeBron James 12 hours, Michelle Wie 10 to 12, and then fellow Canadian Steve Nash around 10 hours. This was back in 2011. And we see Tiger Woods here reporting between only 4 and 5 hours. And actually his performance started to tank around that time. So I think maybe sleep has a little bit to do with it.
So the second question that we got from Nahil Shady, again about sleep quantity, but this time he's asking about splitting up the sleep. So he said, I've read that the optimal amount of sleep is 8 hours. So do these 8 hours means only 8 hours at night, or can it be 4 hours in the night and 4 hours in the day?
Great question. We actually were trying to answer that at my old lab during my graduate school work, and what we found was that the nighttime sleep group, when we compared that to the split sleep group, who had 4 hours of sleep at night and 4 hours during the day, the performance was actually pretty similar between the groups. And the split sleep group ended up getting maybe a little bit less sleep because they're trying to sleep during the day, which is a little bit harder. But overall, their performance was the same, and subjectively, they didn't like the split sleep schedule as well. But I think if you are required to do that based on your work schedule, that it's definitely something you can do. And we typically see it a lot in swimmers. So we'll see a swimmer who has to get up at 5 in the morning. You know, we're talking about maybe an 18-year-old who's more likely to be an evening type. They just simply cannot get enough sleep prior to that 5 a.m. wake up. So for them, we would recommend trying to get as much sleep as you can at night, but then also incorporating maybe a 2-hour nap during the day to make up for that. So that's a strategy if you have that type of schedule.
Very cool. Okay, so I guess when I was reading your bio, it mentioned that you created a whole bunch of protocols for different athletes, correct? So based on what you just said, have you ever recommended maybe shifting the practice from like an early AM practice and maybe doing like a PM thing for like younger athletes?
Absolutely. I mean, the research shows the earlier the practice time, the less sleep you get. And that goes for athletes, that goes for shift workers. So if you're starting work really early, you're not going to be able to get as much sleep. And that's because of your biology, your circadian rhythm. You're just alert before bed. You can't go to bed at 8 p.m. So definitely trying to switch that training time later is really important. Like I would say after 8 a.m. if you can. But a lot of coaches will tell them that and they just simply can't switch it for some reason. It could be due to the pool times or whatever. I think we need to get the word out there that that should be an option, even though not too many people think it is.
Very cool. I actually remember one study that looked at AM versus PM training and like resistance trained athletes. And I think from what I remember, they found greater increases. I can't remember if it was in muscle or strength in the PM group instead of the AM group. So I don't know if this all kind of ties into that, but the PM seems to be better for certain people, I guess.
I mean, if you look at different types of performances across the day, we're typically at our highest level of alertness about 3 hours before our normal bedtime. So that may be the reason why training at that time showed better results. But you have to be aware of your ability to fall asleep. So if I go to bed at 10 p.m. normally, 7 p.m. training time may be a little late in order for me to be able to quickly fall asleep at night. So you just got to work with your own, biology.
Yes. No, for sure. I think there's been times where just being in the gym late and having the headphones blaring with music some people use like pre-workouts, and yeah, just being in the gym and in that sort of pumped up environment, yeah, it could definitely. I felt it myself, bro. I had a hard time sleeping afterwards, right? So, maybe evening, but I guess not too late before your bedtime.
Yeah, even that light exposure, it probably has a lot to do with the light exposure too, because light sends a signal to your brain to wake up. So, and it reduces your melatonin. So if I'm training, at 9 p.m. when my melatonin's being released and I have bright lights on, it's going to suppress that and I'm going to feel more alert.
So the next question is from Derek Dam, and he says, is getting a few hours of sleep, like 3 hours, okay once in a while?
I think so. I mean, it's a realistic situation. You may have kids and they're waking up in the middle of the night. You may have an important meeting coming up, although I would argue that getting more sleep will actually help you perform better. But it's a realistic situation, and I think if you can try and front load sleep leading into that sleep deprivation, you're going to perform better, and also try and recover after. So if you know that, okay, I'm traveling, I'm not going to be getting good sleep, to try and almost bank sleep leading into that sleep deprivation, you're going to do better. And then also try and recover from it by maybe taking a nap during the day after that, or potentially going to bed really early after that 3-hour period. In all, acute sleep deprivation is not a big deal. It's more when we're talking about chronic sleep deprivation. So if you're continually getting 3 to 4 to 5 hours day in and day out, that's where we're going to see some of those negative effects.
So I guess when you talk about banking sleep, that really just means getting a few more hours of sleep before when you're anticipating a night where you're not going to get a lot of sleep, correct?
It's a strategy we use with our athletes all the time. So especially if they're approaching an important competition or they're approaching travel, we would recommend to bank sleep leading into that, because it's certainly one of the strategies we recommend. And also a lot of athletes, they're really concerned about the night before the competition. So this is a way to kind of ease some anxiety. If you can get good sleep in the week before that competition, then you're going to perform better. And this was a study by Sherry Ma in 2011 in Stanford basketball players, and they looked at their sleep normally during what they were getting at baseline, and they found they were only getting about 6.5 hours of sleep per night. And they told the athletes, all right, we want you to be in bed for 10 hours. And they ended up getting almost 2 hours more of sleep per night. And they looked at different performance measures, and they found that when they compared baseline to the end of the sleep extension, their sprint times improved, their free throw percentage improved, their 3-point percentage improved, and their reaction time was reduced with that banking of sleep. So really, really important strategy that we tell our athletes leading into that important competition and potentially leading into travel.
So one thing that I noticed looking at that one slide where the athletes were told to sleep for 10 hours. And they ended up getting 8.5 hours of sleep. So if you know the optimal amount of sleep is 7 to 9 hours, does it make sense to sort of try and overshoot that, knowing that you're actually going to get less sleep than that?
I think if you're not prone to insomnia, so if an athlete has problems falling asleep or staying asleep, if I tell them to be in bed for 10, 11 hours, that's not going to be a good thing, because then they're going to start associate their bed with being awake. But for just a normal, healthy athlete who's maybe not getting as much sleep as they should, trying to do that for at least a week prior to that important event is going to be helpful. There's been, I think, a handful of studies that have done about a week of sleep extension and found good performance results. For this particular study, it was more, I think it was a 4 to 6 week period, so a much longer period. So it could be a strategy, more of a long-term strategy, and just see, okay, I'm approaching this important training period. Let's see what happens if I get more sleep for 2-3 weeks. Do I see better gains?
So the next question came from Alvaror, and he asks, I've been sleeping 10 to 11 hours at night and I still feel tired. Is it because I'm very tired, or do I lack some sort of nutrition? And we actually got a similar question, so we'll just group these together. And this question asked, I yawn and feel tired all day long at work, even if I get up to 9 hours of sleep. What do I need to do?
Those are questions I hear a lot, because it's not just about quantity of sleep, it's about the quality of the sleep as well. So I could tell you, get 10 hours of sleep per night, but if you have potentially an underlying sleep disorder, it's not going to be very useful for you. For just the general population, it's about how you feel. So are you satisfied with your sleep quality? And the research that we've done, this is a really important question to ask yourself. Are you satisfied with your sleep quality? And those who are dissatisfied, there may be something going on. There may be potentially an underlying sleep disorder. And there's also an objective definition of sleep quality as well. So you want to be sleeping in bed for over 85% of the time. So if you're in bed for 10 hours, you want to be sleeping at least 8.5 hours. You want to potentially fall asleep in less than 30 minutes is a good sign you're getting good quality sleep as well. And then only wake up about 1 time per night for less than 20 minutes. And those kind of definition was based on the National Sleep Foundation consensus statement. But in athletes, we see a lot of poor quality sleepers. And we actually recently published a study validating our athlete sleep screening questionnaire. So I don't know if we can put a link to that in the notes, but we designed this questionnaire where athletes can fill it out and then be classified into having none, mild, moderate, and severe. And so that's a way for you to gauge how good of sleep that you're getting. Are you getting a good amount of sleep? And then are you getting good quality sleep and timing as well, which we'll probably talk about later.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. So I'll definitely put the link to that study in the description. It's actually something I want to take and kind of find out where I lie.
Yeah. And so if you do find that, you are getting poor quality sleep, I would say the point of that questionnaire is to kind of flag you as to whether or not you have a problem. But definitely get help. I mean, if you're continually doing all the right things and you're in bed for 9 hours and you still feel like crap when you wake up, I would say definitely get help from a sleep specialist if you can. Reasons for poor sleep quality in athletes. So that review found the majority of athletes get the research, I would say, is a little bit flawed because the tools that they're using haven't been validated in athletes, and that's where our questionnaire kind of changes things, is we actually validated it in 200 Canadian national team athletes. But there's definitely some reasons why athletes tend to have poor quality sleep, and here's some of the reasons right here. Potentially more at risk for hyperarousal. So their brain, doesn't want to shut off because, just like you were saying, being in the gym, having the loud music, having the light, it's hard to actually shut down your brain and prepare your brain for sleep when you're, exercising right before bed. Other reasons could be hydration, disturbing sleep. So, you're supposed to drink a lot of water, and the timing of that, like, are you doing that right before bed, which you don't want to do? Potentially temperature increases from exercise. Again, your temperature drops before you go to sleep. So trying to time that exercise a little bit earlier is a good thing. A regular schedule, so athletes, they have to balance work and school and all of those things, and so having a regular schedule sometimes isn't possible, so that could be another reason. Chronic sleep deprivation from schedule overload, potentially travel and jet lag. One thing that's not on here is caffeine, which I'm a huge proponent of limiting the caffeine use because it's impacting your sleep at night. And there is some recent research showing that caffeine may not even be beneficial in those slow metabolizers. So those people who metabolize caffeine slowly, it may not even be good for their performance.
Yeah, I actually saw the study on your Instagram on one of your posts, and I think the study was saying that even 2 cups of coffee at 7 a.m. affected the people's sleep. I think their time to sleep, like the amount of time it took them to fall asleep, and I think their circadian rhythm or how deep they were able to sleep, right?
Yes, that study's, it's kind of crazy. I mean, to think about, 90% of the population drink at least 1 cup of coffee or have caffeine per day. And to see that study where just 200 milligrams at 7 a.m. still impacted your sleep at night is mind blowing. So for me, I switched to decaf. I wasn't really a coffee drinker until I hit graduate school, and then it was like pounding down the caffeine. But I recently switched to decaf, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I feel so much more refreshed in the morning.
Yeah.
And so that could be a reason for the poor sleep quality as well, is looking at your caffeine intake and seeing, how can I limit it? Like, is that pre-workout drink loaded with caffeine, is that really helping you make gains if it's affecting your recovery at night?
Very true. You know what? Just from my own personal experience, the times that I've cycled off caffeine and just completely cut out drinking coffee altogether, I would fall asleep a lot faster, and I would wake up feeling refreshed, and that energy would continue throughout the entire day. It wasn't something where like I felt energy, for a couple hours in the morning and then I was tired again. It was like consistent energy for the majority of the day.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say though, once you get off of it, and I don't know if you experienced this, it took me at least 2 weeks before I felt good. So it does take a while for that caffeine to get out of your system, and for you not to be as tired, right when you're in that withdrawal period. But there's some work by Nancy Guest, and she did some work with time trial, and basically had both slow and fast metabolizers do a cycling time trial. And she found that in only the fast metabolizers, which was, I think, around 50% of the sample, they showed performance benefits. But actually, in those who were the slow metabolizers, they performed worse by having caffeine 60 minutes, I think, or maybe it was 30 minutes before the time trial. So you really need to question, is this benefiting me?
That's very interesting. So I guess when you say slow versus fast metabolizers, do you want to explain that a little more? Is that referring to how fast your body metabolizes caffeine?
Absolutely. It's based on genotypes, so your genes. You can get a nutrigenomic test where it can tell you, if you're a slow or a fast metabolizer. But I think potentially just knowing, like, are you really sensitive to caffeine, then you're more likely to be more of that slow metabolizer. And looking closely, like if I take caffeine at this point prior to this training, and looking at your performance very carefully can help you to understand if it's effective for you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think we've cited, or I've cited studies before, and I've seen other researchers cite studies about the benefits of caffeine on performance. But I think that's probably too broad of a stroke to, like, it's too broad to like put that on all different athletes. Because like you mentioned, caffeine affects people in different ways, right? And I think, yeah, like you mentioned before as well, the trade off might not be worth it. Like that small boost in performance might not be worth you having a hard time falling asleep or not getting deep, good quality sleep, right?
Yeah, I think it depends on your sport too. I mean, if you have a rugby match once a week and you know that caffeine helps you and the game is in the evening, then maybe having caffeine would be useful. But Ian Dunican, he did a study in rugby players and found that number one, they're taking way too much caffeine to begin with. And then the timing of it, some of them were even taking it during halftime, which halftime, I think, for rugby, right? Hopefully. Is there,
No,
I think.
I know football at halftime. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay, sorry, I'm not a rugby. I'm American, so
Yeah.
sorry if I messed that up. But they're taking it at halftime where by the time the game's over, that's when it's kicking in. So, and then on top of that, a few of the players were pulling all-nighters potentially because of the amount of caffeine that they were consuming. So it kind of depends on the sport. But if I have multiple games in a row, you really got to question how that caffeine use is impacting your recovery across time. And if it's maybe once a week or, less frequently, then sure, go for it. But if it's multiple competitions in a row, definitely be aware of that.
So the next question from AZ Nafia. The question is, why do I sometimes feel more lazy or groggy after 8 hours of good sleep opposed to just 4 or 5 hours of sleep?
Oh, okay. Well, I wonder the timing of their sleep. So when are they going to bed and getting 8 hours and they feel like crap versus when they're going to bed and waking up and only getting 5 hours? I think it could probably have to do with the timing of their sleep. So for example, if this person normally gets up at 8 a.m., let's say, and they go to bed at 3 a.m., and potentially they're maybe more of that night owl. So they go to bed at 3, wake up at 8, they're getting 5 hours. Versus, let's say they go to bed at 3 and wake up at 11 or, something along those lines. The consistency of the sleep period matters. And this was a study in Fitbit and looking at over 6 billion nights of data in Fitbit users. And what they found was that in this particular study, bedtime consistency matters. So going to bed at the same time within a margin of about an hour is going to help you get more sleep. So here we have the bedtime variation. So this is a person here who only varied their bedtime by 20 minutes across the week versus a person who varied it by, more than 2 hours. And what they found was that the more you vary your bedtime, the less sleep you're actually getting. So this is the amount of sleep here. And so more variation equals less sleep. And I think that could explain that question for that person. If they, let's say, were going to bed, at midnight and waking up at 5 a.m. versus going to bed at 3 a.m. and getting up at 11 a.m. So I don't have a lot of information. I wish I had more information from that question, but it could very well have to do with the consistency of bedtime and consistency of wake time.
So do you think it would make sense to figure out what the best time for you to sleep is on a daily basis, and just try to stick to that as much as possible?
Absolutely. I mean, you wanna align. Let me go to this slide here. You want to try and align your sleep with your biology. So there are about 15% of the population that are larks, so they like to go to bed early and they like to wake up early, versus 15% who are night owls who like to go to bed late and wake up late, with the majority of us kind of falling in between. But trying to align sleep with your biology is important, and I think it'll help you feel more refreshed. Now, a lot of times, especially for those night owls, because of school and because of work, they can't necessarily, sleep until 11 a.m. But in those instances, you would want to use strategic light and melatonin to help shift your circadian rhythms.
We've heard a lot about the circadian rhythm. I'm just wondering, can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of misconceptions as to what a circadian rhythm is. A circadian rhythm, it's the rhythms that occur in our body that are around 24 hours. So typically a person will have a slightly longer circadian rhythm. So that means it's easy for them to delay their sleep versus trying to go to bed earlier. So that's why it's easier for people to travel west, because their circadian rhythm is slightly longer than 24 hours. And here's a picture here. This is two main processes that regulate our sleep-wake cycle. So we have the circadian rhythm on the bottom here, and what we see is just kind of fluctuations in alertness across a 24-hour day. And that level of alertness can also correspond with our melatonin. So melatonin is this sleepiness hormone. It's released about 2 hours before your normal bedtime, and high levels of melatonin equate to low levels of alertness. So circadian rhythm helps regulate our sleep-wake cycle, and it's not just about sleep pressure. So this top picture is showing us about sleep pressure, the homeostatic regulation. And what that means is as the day progresses, as our wake day progresses, the longer we've been awake, the higher pressure for sleep. So if I just pulled an all-nighter, my sleep pressure, these arrows are going to be a lot longer until I fall asleep, and then it starts to dissipate once I get that recovery sleep. So it's not just about the amount of time that you've been awake, but it also corresponds to our circadian rhythm as well. So what time of day are you, within your own biological clock? I actually have a good example of how to explain this. I worked, during my graduate work, we did a lot of sleep deprivation studies, and we did 62-hour sleep deprivation periods where we had to keep people awake for that long, and that's equates to 2 full nights of missed sleep. And it was interesting to me, not, just kind of being new to the field, that at certain times of day, they would be really alert. And, we're talking at like hour 59, they would be more alert than when they were at hour, let's say 20. And that had to do with their circadian rhythm. So they were just at a time of day where their levels of alertness were higher. And it didn't matter that they had skipped, 2 full nights of sleep. So circadian rhythm is a very powerful regulator of our sleep.
So the next question comes from Ray, DPT13, and he asks, is there a certain stage of sleep that's most important? And if so, do we have any control in influencing it?
That's a great question. I get asked that a lot. There are 4 main stages of sleep. And so what we're seeing here, the electrical activity of the brain, so the EEGs, what's going on with our brain while we're recording sleep. And we have 3 stages of non-REM sleep. So REM meaning rapid eye movement, and so 3 stages of non-REM, and then we have our REM, our rapid eye movement stage of sleep. And for athletes, they're really interested in the deepest stage of sleep. So here, this is stage 3, non-REM stage 3. This is the deepest stage of sleep. So we see the largest slow waves throughout the brain that are occurring, and this is where growth hormone is being released. So a lot of athletes are really trying to capitalize on trying to increase the deep sleep, which just exercise itself increases deep sleep, but also potentially, there's minor increases when you eat more fiber, or sleep on a cooler mattress, so there are ways to try and increase that deep sleep. But how sleep progresses across the night, we have no control over that. So here we have the timing in the sleep episode. So this is from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. And then here we have the stages of sleep across the night. So we have W standing for wake, R for REM, and then non-REM 1, 2, and 3. So for this particular person, it took them about 40 minutes to fall asleep. And then they went into non-REM stage 1 for a few minutes. And then they're into the stage 2 for a little chunk here. And then immediately they're, after that, getting into the deepest stage of sleep here. And we see much of the deeper stages of sleep, so the non-REM 3, occurring in the first half of the night versus a lot of the REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep, occurring in the last half of the night. But we really can't control how these stages distribute across the night. And if I took this person again and I studied their sleep, the next night, I would see a totally different picture. And so there is kind of some false information out there from some sleep coaches trying to calculate in 90-minute increments when they should be going to bed based on 90-minute increments of when they have to get up. So, for example, they have to get up at 8 a.m., this particular calculator, let's say, based in 90-minute increments would say, go to bed at 2 a.m. And what we see here is that, REM doesn't, and they say, we want you to wake up during REM because you'll feel more alert.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this?
No, I have. I definitely have. I think I've listened to a whole podcast about it where, like you mentioned, they wanted their athletes to wake up at a certain time because it aligns with a certain part of this rhythm, and that's when they're most alert.
Yeah, so But if we look at this picture, I mean, we see the REM. It's not exactly occurring in 90-minute increments, and so you really can't predict what stage you'll wake up in based on this 90-minute theory. And so here we see, if we go from here to here, it's a shorter distance than if we were to go from here to here, which is much longer, so a longer period of time. And then when we get towards the end of the night, we see REM periods occurring much more frequently. So this is a lot less potentially than 90 minutes from here to here. And so honestly, really don't trust those sleep calculators, and just try and get more sleep rather than, trying to cut your sleep short and make it in 90-minute increments. That would be my advice.
So one thing that you mentioned is that that rhythm changes from night to night, right? So even if you were to sleep at the same time and wake up at the same time, there's a chance that that rhythm pattern that we just looked at would be different night to night. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. So depending on, like, if you take a nap during the day, you're going to have probably potentially on how, let's say you take a 60-minute nap, you're probably not going to have as much deep sleep at night. And let's say you have more caffeine or something during the day, that can impact your sleep architecture throughout the night. So it depends on a lot of things that are occurring during the day as to how that affects your sleep architecture or the way that you travel through the stages across the night.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess that's more reason as to why that 90 minutes rhythm doesn't make any sense, because from day to day you can have so many fluctuations in how much caffeine you consumed and whether you took a nap or not, which can really throw the whole thing off, right?
Yeah. So don't trust it and just try and get more sleep.
So this next question comes from me because this pertains to my personal situation, and I'm sure it affects a lot of other people as well. So for those that can't get enough sleep during a busy work week, can we make up the sleep on a weekend?
That's a great question. We hear that quite a bit. So for you, what would be a typical sleep period during the week and then versus the weekend?
So let's say the not so bad nights are like midnight until 6, which
okay.
Like right now it's 12:15.
Yeah.
12:15 a.m. and I'm going to be up at 6. So this is a prime example on a Tuesday or a Wednesday morning now of less than 6 hours of sleep. So let's call that not too bad, and then a bad night from say 2 a.m. to like 6.
Okay, and then on the weekends?
And then on the weekends, sleeping a little later, maybe 1, 2 in the morning, and then waking up at like say 10. So I'm actually getting like 8 hours of sleep. Do I need more sleep on the weekend to try to catch up, or does that even work, or am I better off just like fixing my weekday schedule?
Yeah, I mean, you wanna try and aim for that minimum during the week if you can. A lot of times that's not possible.
Yeah.
But can you nap? So if you're if you're gonna go to bed late, wake up early, can you nap maybe the day before? Can you take a recovery nap? We like to think of sleep across the week for our athletes because their schedules are so inconsistent. So can you make up for that lost sleep across the week? So if you need 7 hours, let's try and aim for 50, let's say 52, 53 hours, a little bit more than you think you need. And try and schedule that sleep across the week by making up for it with naps, sleeping in a little bit later. We do start to see problems when we look at your, let's say, sleep during the week versus sleep during your free days. So if there's a big discrepancy in that midpoint of sleep, so if, let's say, during the week, your midpoint of sleep is 4 a.m. versus during the weekend and it's more like 6 a.m., when we start getting over that hour mark, that's when we start to see problems with potentially more higher risk for depression and anxiety, potentially metabolic issues. So really, that consistency matters. But again, trying to make up for that lost sleep by not sleeping until 10 a.m., trying to be a little bit more consistent, I think would be helpful. Does that answer? That's kind of a long-winded.
No, it definitely helps. So from what I gather from that is naps to try to make it up during the week. So maybe on my lunch break, if I got 45 minutes to sleep, somewhere in my car, or if there's like a games room or like a rest area, like taking naps when I can, and maybe even on my weekend trying to get that sleep more in line with what I'm doing in the week, right? So maybe sleeping a little earlier than I usually do on a weekday, and then maybe sleeping a little later. Like I'm extending my sleep, but the middle point might be similar to like my weekday midpoint.
Yes, absolutely.
It's kind of being creative. I don't know, but like it just seems like it's kind of aligning that midpoint. Is that that's it all?
Yeah, and there a lot of sleep scientists, they were really anti sleeping in on the weekends, too much. And there was a recent study that came out showing that that you can sleep in on the weekends a little bit, and it's not as detrimental to your health and well-being. I would just try and limit it to 2 hours max, so not trying to shift your schedule too much, because the reason for that is if I normally get up at 7 a.m. during the week, and then I'm sleeping in till, let's say, 10, 11 on the weekend, come Sunday night, I'm not going to be tired. I'm not, if we go back to that graph that I showed, I wake up at 11 a.m., then my sleep pressure starts to build, but I'm not going to be tired until, 2 a.m. So that's part of the reason why trying to keep a consistent schedule is really important. It's so that your brain and your body knows when it should be sleeping and when it should be awake.
Very interesting. So I guess one other thing as well is, like, from what I've noticed is that when I do oversleep on the weekends, I don't feel as good. Like, is too much sleep like associated to maybe depression or like not being in a great mood? Like, does it affect your mood if you sleep too much?
I think in that example, it would be more that the timing of your sleep is off. I wouldn't say that it's because you're sleeping more. I would say it's because of the timing. So if I sleep in a lot later, my body's used to producing melatonin at a certain time, and it's used to shutting off the melatonin at a certain time. But if I totally affect when I get that light exposure, it just makes you feel like crap. It makes you feel groggy and not very well rested because your timing is so inconsistent.
Okay, cool. So I'll focus on naps to try to make it up and try to get my timing as consistent as possible.
Yeah, and try to go to bed earlier.
Try to limit it to like 1 a.m. But yeah, no, it's definitely something that I need to work on in general. Okay, so next question, and it is the last question for part 1. How are you supposed to feel in the morning after a good night of sleep? And this question comes from Christian.
Yes, that's a great question, and I think it kind of sums up what we've been talking about. So making sure that you're getting a good amount of sleep, so good quantity between that 7 and 9 hours if you can, will help contribute to waking up feeling alert for sure. And then also worrying about the quality of that sleep. So we didn't really talk much about blue blocking glasses. Maybe we'll cover that in the strategies. But any way that you can improve the quality is gonna help you feel more refreshed in the morning. And then timing as well. So I could get 8 hours of sleep per night. I could have really good quality, but if that timing is not in line with my biology, my circadian rhythm, that could also impact how refreshed I feel. So kind of worrying about how much sleep you're getting, the quality, and then making sure that the timing is in line with your biology if you can. And if not, can you get more light in the morning to really shut off that melatonin to help shift your circadian rhythm earlier? So there are strategies, if you are more of that night owl and you require to be up for work. But signs that you're getting good quantity, quality, and timing would be waking up without an alarm, feeling refreshed, I would say, within 30 minutes of awakening. So there is something called sleep inertia where some people can wake up feeling groggy, but as long as that goes away within, 30, 45 minutes, that's perfectly normal. So no, and then what about your caffeine intake? So are you feeling alert without needing a ton of coffee during the day? That's also a good sign that your quantity, quality, and timing are lining up really well.
So one question I would have is, up to what time do you think that energy should last, just generally speaking? So if you wake up in the morning and you get past that feeling of inertia, and then say 30 minutes later you feel energized, you feel refreshed, but then how long are we expecting to ride out that feeling of good energy?
Well, if we go back to the slide that I showed earlier with the circadian rhythm, here we go. We do see natural fluctuations in alertness across the 24-hour day. So typically we will see a bit of a dip in alertness, right after lunchtime. And that's specifically related to our circadian rhythm. And so naturally we're going to see a dip in alertness around that time. And then naturally we're also going to see a rise in alertness when we're in that 2 to 3 hours before our normal bedtime as well. And then we'll also see that dip in alertness related to our melatonin. So the higher levels of melatonin, around 4 or 5 a.m., the lower levels of alertness. So I would say if you're good until, 1 or 2 p.m., then that's natural. But if you hit a wall at, 10, 11 a.m., it may be that you're not getting good quantity, quality, or your timing is not in line with your biology.
So that was the last of the questions for part 1. I hope you all enjoyed it. I will have Amy back for part 2, where we'll talk about optimizing sleep for athletic performance and body composition. So Amy, can you let the people know where they can find you and where they can see more of your work?
Absolutely. I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I also post some stuff on Instagram as well. You can find me at Sleep for Sport, and that's the number 4. And then I'm connected with Center for Sleep and Human Performance, so you can check out their website. We're probably going to have the questionnaire up there as well, but you will be able to just get the questionnaire directly, I think, through the link that that you will provide in the notes. So people can get that right away, and they can figure out where they're at on the scale and use it in their clients and their athletes that they're working with as well. So social media and then the Center for Sleep website, people can get in touch.
Okay, amazing. So Amy, thank you so much for coming on. Highly appreciate it. Just amazing answers, very thorough, and I really appreciate you having the graphics and the slides as well, because they, they're very detailed and just made things very easy to understand. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I think it's cool to do podcasts and stuff, but I think having the visuals for people to see is really really great to get them to understand the information.
No, for sure. It was definitely a major help. So guys, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. I'll put the link in the description for everything Amy mentioned, all her social media links, her Twitter, her Instagram, the website she mentioned, as well as the questionnaire. We'll see you guys in part 2.
All right, thanks for having me.
Very welcome. Thank you. Take care, guys.